They shook, they thumped, they hammered out bales at 15 a minute, and then they vanished. Before the yellow and red giants took over Britain's fields, a scrappy Welsh workshop, a Staffordshire ironworks, and a Yorkshire gearmaker built balers that farmers swore by and history forgot. Some were world firsts, one drove itself. Most are now rusting in hedgerows or reborn at rally shows. These are 10 forgotten British balers, the honest machines that packed the hay before the world moved on. Number 1. The Jones Tiger. Our story starts in a converted lead works at Rosesmore in North Wales, where two farming brothers, David and Glyn Jones, teamed up with an engineer named George Williams to solve a very simple problem. How do you pack loose straw and hay into something a man can actually carry and stack? Their answer, in 1942, was the Jones Tiger, a big, heavy, stationary baler that stood in the yard and swallowed material fed straight from a threshing machine. This was wartime Britain, when the government was demanding every acre produce more, and contractors needed to process huge quantities of crop quickly. The Tiger was built for them. At around 18 feet long and roughly 3 tons, this was not a machine for a small family farm. It was a workhorse for the men who traveled from farm to farm doing the heavy jobs. Here's the thing modern viewers forget. The Tiger didn't tie its own bales. It was, in the honest language of the day, a packing machine. A worker still had to thread and tie the strings by hand around each bale as it came out. It was hot, dusty, relentless work, but it was a genuine leap forward from the old hand methods and the loose stacks that rotted in wet weather. The Tiger made the Jones name. It proved that two brothers from a Welsh village could build serious agricultural machinery that competed with the big boys. To make the idea affordable for ordinary farmers rather than just contractors, Jones soon followed it with a smaller, cheaper version called the Cub. Today, a surviving Tiger is a genuine rarity. When one turns up at a vintage rally fully restored in Jones red, it draws a crowd, because most people have simply never seen the machine that started it all. Number 2. The Jones Panther. If the Tiger got Jones noticed, the Panther is the machine that made them famous, and it deserves far more recognition than it gets. The Panther was another stationary baler, but it carried a revolutionary feature. It tied its own bales. No more team of men wrestling with twine on every single bale. The Panther was a self-tying machine, and it could be driven directly off the threshing machine's power, which meant a farmer didn't need to find a second engine or power source to run it. On a busy threshing day, that was a huge saving in men, fuel, and hassle. But the Panther's real claim to fame is an innovation that sounds trivial and was actually brilliant: the grooved bale. Jones had patented a clever knotting system, often called the tucker knotter, that recessed the twine into a groove pressed into the bale itself. The problem with a lot of early balers was that the strings slipped off the corners, and a bale that lost its strings fell apart, wasting all that work. By sinking the twine into the bale, Jones virtually eliminated that problem. The grooved bale became a Jones signature, and farmers trusted it. Examples of the Panther date to the early 1940s, testing on real Welsh farms with the brothers watching every bale. It was a machine built by people who had actually done the work themselves, and it showed. The Panther is a perfect example of a forgotten first. It's not glamorous, it didn't drive around a field, it sat in a yard and thumped away. But it took Jones from a maker of simple packing machines to a company with genuine patented engineering that the rest of the industry had to respect. Without the Panther and its self-tying knotter, the machines that came later would never have been possible. Number 3. The Jones Invicta. Now here is a machine that genuinely deserves a place in the history books, and almost nobody outside the collector world has heard of it. In the late 1940s, Jones built the Invicta, and they billed it as the world's first self-propelled pickup baler. Think about what that means. Up to this point, balers either sat still in a yard or were towed behind a tractor. The Invicta drove itself across the field, picked the hay up off the ground, packed it and tied its own knots, all in one machine under its own power. It was, in essence, a baler that had grown its own legs. Under the skin, it was clever and pragmatic. It took the design ideas of the firm's earlier trailed Lion baler and added an engine, a Ford unit, and a variable drive so the operator could match the machine's speed to the crop. It won a Royal Agricultural Society of England gold medal at the 1950 Royal Show, which was about the highest honor a British agricultural machine could earn, and it cemented Jones's reputation as innovators. And yet, the Invicta never really caught on. It was ahead of its time, it was expensive, and by the mid-1950s the competition was offering cheaper, lighter, trailed pickup balers that most farmers found easier to justify. The Invicta stayed in production until around 1956 and then quietly disappeared. That's the bittersweet heart of the Jones story. They kept inventing world firsts and the market kept buying the cheaper option. The Invicta is a machine that was genuinely decades ahead of the self-propelled harvesting machinery that would become normal much later. A handful survive in collectors' hands, and when one runs at a show, you're watching a true pioneer, a British world first that history simply walked past. Number 4. The Jones Superstar. By the dawn of the 1960s, Jones Balers stood on the very edge of greatness. They'd built a smart new factory, Broncoed Park Works on the Wrexham Road in Mold, opened in 1958 with good rail access, and their trailed minor and major balers were selling well, with something like 40% going for export. Then, in October 1960, after 2 years of development, they launched the machine that was meant to conquer the world, the Jones Superstar, alongside its smaller sibling, the Star. The Superstar was a genuine world beater. In good conditions, it could reportedly turn out up to 15 bales a minute, a phenomenal rate for the era, and it wore the firm's famous Welsh Dragon badge with pride. This was the peak of everything the brothers had learned since that first stationary Tiger in 1942. Fast, reliable, well-engineered, and built to handle British conditions and narrow Welsh lanes better than the wide American imports. The Superstar was so good that the American giant Alice Chalmers came calling, wanting Jones to build the Superstar for the United States market, and this is where the story turns. That interest led, by late 1961, to Alice Chalmers taking over Jones Balers entirely. The brothers, at the very peak of their success, sold up. Production continued at Mold under new ownership for years. Later, Jones models like the Mk10 were even sold rebadged as the Alice Chalmers 5005T. But the independent dream was over. The Mold plant finally closed in 1981. The Superstar proves they had the engineering to do it. Restored examples still appear at sales and shows today, and among enthusiasts, the Jones Dragon still breathes fire. Number 5. The Bamfords BL60. Now we leave Wales and travel to Uttoxeter in Staffordshire, home of Bamfords Limited, a company whose roots stretch back to an ironmonger's shop opened by Henry Bamford in 1845. By the 20th century, Bamfords were one of Britain's great agricultural names, famous for mowers, rakes, hay turners, manure spreaders, and stationary engines, all pouring out of their sprawling Leighton ironworks. But they came relatively late to the pickup baler party, and the way they got there tells you a lot about the era. Rather than design a baler from scratch, Bamford struck a manufacturing agreement with the Long Manufacturing Company of Tarboro in the United States to build balers under license. The result was the BL60, produced in the mid-1950s and built in Uttoxeter. Early machines were powered by an Enfield diesel engine, so you didn't even need a tractor with a power takeoff to run one. The baler brought its own power to the field. It was soon joined by a smaller model, the BL48 in 1955, which could be had either engine-driven or PTO-driven. The BL60 launched Bamfords into a market they would dominate for decades. From this single licensed machine, Bamfords grew into one of the largest baler manufacturers in the country, eventually exporting their machines to more than 40 countries around the world. What makes the BL60 forgotten is exactly that it was the humble beginning. It's the machine everyone skips over on the way to the famous later Bamfords. But without that shrewd licensing deal and that first ungainly engine-driven yellow baler, there would have been no Bamfords baler empire at all. It's the acorn, not the oak, and that's precisely why it's worth remembering. Number 6. The Bamfords BL62. By the middle of the 1960s, Bamfords had found their stride. The company that had started with a single licensed American design was now iterating fast, releasing new and improved models through the decade, refining the pickup, the packing action, and the knotters with each generation. One of those 1960s machines was the BL62, a trailed PTO pickup baler, with surviving working instruction books dated to 1964. It sat squarely in what many enthusiasts now call the golden age of the conventional square baler, a time when British fields were dotted with the neat rectangular bales that a single farmhand could grab, swing, and stack onto a trailer by hand. The BL62 is a machine that captures the everyday reality of 1960s haymaking. This wasn't a glamorous world first or a prize winner. It was a dependable yellow tool that turned up season after season, chewed through the swaths and dropped bales behind it in the summer sun. It represents thousands of ordinary British farms, thousands of ordinary harvests, and thousands of aching backs at the end of a long day. That's also exactly why machines like the BL62 get forgotten. They were so common, so much a part of the furniture, that nobody thought to celebrate them at the time. They weren't rare or exotic. They were just there, doing the job. And when they wore out, most were simply scrapped or shoved into the back of a barn. Today, a good original BL62 is a lovely slice of social history. Bamfords models like this deserve remembering not for being extraordinary, but for being the reliable, unglamorous backbone of British hay and straw harvesting through the heart of the 1960s. Number 7. The Bamfords BL58. If the BL60 was the beginning of the Bamfords baler story, the BL58 marks the end of an era, the last of the classic all-Bamford yellow balers before everything changed. Introduced in 1969, the BL58 became one of the most popular machines in the entire Bamfords range. It was the culmination of everything the Uttoxeter engineers had learned across 15 years of building balers, and farmers loved it. Even today, it's well enough remembered that model companies made scale toy versions of it, a small but telling sign of a machine that left a genuine mark. But the BL58 arrived at a pivotal moment for the company. Bamfords had already, in 1968, rejected a takeover proposal from their rival family firm J.C. Bamford, the excavator company we all know as JCB, run by relatives. That refusal to merge would have consequences. And in 1971, in a fascinating twist of British agricultural history, Bamfords acquired the Alice Chalmers baler range, the very range that traced its lineage back to the Welsh Jones balers that Alice Chalmers had bought a decade earlier. The moment that deal went through, the familiar Bamfords yellow livery began to disappear. The next model, the BL59, rolled out in fresh red paint, and the classic yellow Bamford era was over. So the BL58 stands as a kind of full stop, the final best-loved machine of the original independent yellow-painted Bamfords baler line. There's a poignancy to it. This is a company that went from an 1845 ironmonger's shop to a great Staffordshire engineering works employing hundreds, to a baler maker exporting worldwide. And the BL58 is the high-water mark of that self-made success, just before consolidation, red paint, and eventual liquidation swept the old independent Bamfords away. Number 8. The David Brown Albion. Now for one of the most genuinely unusual and genuinely forgotten British balers of them all, from a company far better known for tractors and sports cars than for hay machinery. David Brown, the Yorkshire gear-making dynasty from Huddersfield, built famous tractors and even owned Aston Martin at one point. But in 1955, they also took over a Lancashire firm called Harrison McGregor and Guest of Lee, a long-established maker of mowers, binders and balers whose products carried the proud old British brand name Albion. That's where the David Brown Albion baler comes from. And it was like nothing else in the field. Where a normal baler pushes its packing ram front to back, in line with the direction you're driving, the Albion turned the whole thing sideways. Its bale chamber and packing ram ran crosswise, at right angles to the direction of travel. This clever bit of thinking made the machine much shorter than a conventional baler, and, crucially, it reduced the violent rocking motion that plagued ordinary balers, where the ram's thumping would pitch the whole tractor and baler outfit backwards and forwards all day long. It was a smart idea, produced from the mid-1950s and into the 1960s in that distinctive crossfeed layout. On paper, it should have been a winner. Shorter, smoother, cleverer. In reality, it was not a huge success, and relatively few were ever sold. Farmers were conservative, the conventional layout was well proven, and the Albion's sideways design never really caught the public imagination. David Brown itself was eventually bought by the American Tenneco Group, owners of J.I. Case, in 1972, and the Albion baler faded into obscurity. Which is a shame, because the David Brown Albion is exactly the kind of bold, distinctively British engineering experiment that makes this history so rich. Surviving examples are prized rarities today, and when one runs at a show, that sideways ram thumping away is a wonderful reminder that British engineers weren't afraid to do things completely differently. Number 9. The International Harvester B46. Not every British baler came from a purely British company, and the machines built at International Harvester's Great Doncaster factory are proof that some of the most familiar balers in British fields were designed in America but genuinely built in Yorkshire. International Harvester of Great Britain had bought a factory at Wheatley Hall Road in Doncaster back in the late 1930s. It was requisitioned for war work, returned to the company in 1946, and by 1949 the first British-built farmall tractor was driven off the line by the Minister of Agriculture himself. Alongside tractors, the Doncaster plant built implements, including balers. The British-built IH balers began in 1950 with the B45, based on the American number 45. It was a solid, PTO-driven medium-density machine, and it sold so well that it wasn't replaced for a full decade. Its replacement, arriving in 1960, was the B46, and this is our 1960s machine. The B46 offered higher output than the old B45 while keeping the reliability that had made the earlier machine a fixture on British farms. Crucially for cost-conscious farmers, these balers were increasingly bought in plain PTO form, driven off the tractor's power takeoff rather than carrying their own engine, which kept the purchase price down. By this point, twine tying had firmly overtaken the old wire twist system as farmers' preferred choice, though heavy-duty wire tie versions still existed for the toughest work. The B46 is often overshadowed by the more famous IH balers that came later, which is exactly why it belongs on this list. It was the workhorse that carried International Harvester's baler reputation through the early 1960s, built in their thousands by British workers in a Yorkshire factory. It may have worn an American badge, but the B46 was a Doncaster machine through and through, and a genuine, if forgotten, part of British haymaking. Number 10. The International Harvester B47. We finish with a machine that many British farmers of a certain age will tell you, without hesitation, was one of the best balers ever to work in this country, the International Harvester B47. Launched in 1965 from that same Doncaster factory, the B47 replaced the B46 and, in the words of those who used it, took efficiency to an even higher level. It arrived to real acclaim and sold strongly across the UK. Ask an old contractor who ran one and you'll often hear it described as simply the best baler in use over here at the time. High praise in a market that also included Bamfords, Claas, Massey Ferguson, Welger, and New Holland. But it wasn't without its quirks, and this is where the honest history matters. The B47's biggest weakness by common agreement was its knotters. On many machines they needed constant attention. Some operators found themselves rebuilding the knotters several times over a single baling season, fitting new parts to keep them tying cleanly. The best men got so skilled they could set the knotters up by eye in the middle of a field. That was the reality of 1960s baling. A good machine and a good mechanic went hand in hand, because when the knotter missed, the bale fell apart behind you. The B47 sold well right through the late 1960s before making way for the sleeker International 440 in the 1970s, which in turn led to the famous 445 of the 1980s. But for a whole generation, the B47 was the baler, the machine that defined the golden age of the small square bale in Britain. And that golden age didn't last. By the 1980s and 90s, big square balers and giant round balers were changing everything, and the market for the small conventional baler declined until it was terminal. The machines themselves lived on, kept alive by horse owners and small farmers who loved the easy-to-handle bales, but the era of these particular British-built balers was ending. They shook, they thumped, they broke down, and they got fixed by farmers who knew every bolt. Most were scrapped without a second thought. But thanks to a growing band of enthusiasts, restorers, and rally-goers, the Jones Dragon still breathes fire, the yellow Bamfords still roll out bales at summer shows, and these forgotten British balers are getting the second life and the respect they always deserved.